Welcome to panel number 5 of the joint Academy Day of the Austrian Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society of Canada. The panel is entitled Freedom of Speech and Freedom of Research, Challenges and Responsibilities for Academies and Academics in the 21st Century. My name is Alice Vadreau. I'm a member of the Young Academy of the Austrian Academy of Sciences and an associate professor in the field of international relations and the environment. We have a very interesting panel here today composed of members of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, including Simone Gingrich and Christian Sturmbauer, and members of the Royal Society of Canada, including Nathalie de Rosier and Len Findley. They will all present themselves later. First, I would like to say a few things about the organization of this panel and also about the topics that we will discuss in the next 1.5 hours. So after my introduction, each panelist will introduce himself and herself. Then we will have a round of short statements on this topic and then start the discussion. We will have approximately an hour of discussion among the panelists and then time for questions by the audience. I will read these questions to everybody and I look very much forward to a lively debate. So what stands behind freedom of speech and freedom of research? Why does it matter for academies and academics? So from my perspective, freedom of speech and freedom of research are two very important and interrelated principles of vibrant democracies. However, in the past decade, several developments indicate the need to rethink the challenges and responsibilities attached to the objective to couple freedom of speech and freedom of research. Universities, research centers, and of course academics too, increasingly expect their scholars to develop public communication of their scholarly work and to engage with stakeholders and policymakers. Nevertheless, in practice, these duties come with the challenge to disentangle values from facts and to reflect on the role of science in public and political discourse. So there are 3 important developments that I picked to somehow indicate that academia and academics face very specific threats regarding the combination of the responsibility to produce knowledge and facts and the duty to inform public discourse and policy making. So I will just point to some of these developments that I think are interesting and that may also eventually stimulate our debate. So firstly, the decrease of public trust in science is exemplified by climate denial, for instance, where scientific findings and data sources are delegitimized. This example can also be extended to other areas of science and policy and is at the heart also of ongoing vaccination debates all over the world in relation to COVID-19. So we see mass movements all over the world against science that reveal both the politicization of expertise and the strategic delegitimization of science in public debates. Then there is a second development that is also related to COVID-19. So academics and academia that want to inform policymakers or want to say something in the public in relation to their science face the challenge to adequately inform in light of scientific uncertainty and rapid developments in science, which also lays experts and science open to attack. Yeah? And then a third point that I would like to make relates to who policymakers and, for instance, the media select as legitimate experts to advise policymakers and to inform public discourse. And this is not always transparent, which leads to the question of who should and who should not get the right to speak on specific issues in public. So there are several examples, some of them I mentioned already in relation to climate change or COVID-19 debates that demonstrate the tendency to include or to exclude certain individual voices from public discourse, which plays into the hands of populists. So this is also exemplified by recent university or student unions' attempts to disinvite scholars with outspoken political standpoints. And of course, all of these developments play out in relation to the institutions and how they position themselves in this, but also to individual academics. So in the next hour, I hope that we can have a fruitful debate on these issues and talk about both the challenges and responsibilities for individual scholars, but also of academics and what especially academics can do. And now I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves so we know who is here with us today. Maybe we start with Simon Gingrich and then Christian Sturmbauer and Len Findley.
Yes, thank you, Alice, for hosting this panel and for having me as a part of it. My name is Simon Gingrich. I am a member of the Austrian Academy of Science, the Young Academy, as Alice. I am a senior researcher at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, and I'm a social ecologist, so an interdisciplinary researcher working on sustainability challenges. And I will bring in this perspective today.
Well, thank you. Then I will shortly introduce myself. Also, I'm very happy that I've been invited to be a member of this panel. I'm professor for zoology and evolutionary biology at the University of Graz, where I headed the Department of Zoology for 15 years, and then after it got fused with the Department of Botany to the Department of Biology, I was another 2 years heading this department, and now I hand it over to younger people. I'm also a member of the Center for Excellence at the University of Graz, Climate Change Graz, which specifically deals with the challenges that come with climate change. And as a biologist, of course, I'm also concerned about the biodiversity crisis, which is equally connected to climate to a great extent. We also have a doctoral program in which I take part. It's called Ecology and Evolution in Changing Environments, which also is pretty topical. And at the Academy of Sciences, I'm a member of the Commission of Interdisciplinary Ecological Studies, where I'm vice chair. And I'm editing, one of the responsible editors of the Biosystematics and Ecology series, where we publish regularly species inventories for our country of a wide variety of groups. My field of expertise is evolutionary biology, and my research centers about the rapid origin of biological diversity, specifically adaptive radiations, which I study primarily on the model system of African cichlid fishes. In other terms, I'm a delegate of the Austrian Academy of Science for the Austrian Biodiversity Commission, which is a governmental interaction platform with scientists, and a member of the steering committee of the Austrian Biodiversity Council, where Alice is also highly active, and in the council of the Austrian Barcode of Life initiative. And with all these duties, I'm very much concerned about the developments of communication and the issues that are related with new developments in the last decade. Let me hand over to Len Findley.
Thank you, Christian. My name is Len Findley. I was born in Scotland, as you can probably still hear. I was educated at Aberdeen University and then did my doctoral work at Oxford. I then emigrated to Canada. I think of myself as having the best of three possible worlds, an Oxford degree, a Scottish education, and a Canadian job. These have worked out very, very well for me. I'm a literary scholar and cultural theorist. I have also spent a great deal of time on defending the humanities within a broader advocacy for the universities as an academic, intellectual, and justice project, that they are absolutely essential to healthy economies and to robust democracies. I think I'm the only person who has been the president of one of the academies of the Royal Society and simultaneously chair of our National Association for Committee for Academic Freedom and Tenure. I held both these jobs simultaneously in order to enhance the communications between notions of academic eminence and excellence and the essential role that academic freedom and the conditions that it nourishes go with. Since I'm retired now, though it doesn't seem like it, but I guess I was in a bubble before I go into my COVID bubble. But I continue to work for the society and just finished work on a working group on the future of post-secondary education after COVID, which has been very, very interesting indeed and very, very timely. And I also continue as a senior fellow at the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University in Toronto. So life is good, difficulties surround us, but with colleagues like you, I hope we can make a good difference. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do not see Nathalie Desrosiers. I'm not sure if she has technical problems or not. I propose that if she joins us a bit later, then we give her the chance to introduce herself and we just start a debate. And maybe, I don't know, who would like to start? I think I will just hand over to whoever would like to have the first kind of brief statement on this topic.
I can go first.
Yeah.
I'm not two people. I'm not Natalie as well as Len, but I'll do my best. And just to give the sense of the Canadian perspective on this. So I say hello to everyone from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm speaking to you from Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis people. I am speaking, therefore, from a place where relations between orality and literacy, speech and writing have a profoundly colonial history. I am not speaking Cree or Michif or any of the other several indigenous languages of this region, because I cannot. I am not speaking French, Canada's other official language, though I would feel obliged to do so in other settings. And I am able to speak English on this panel because colleagues have shown an admirable capacity and willingness to do so too, forgoing the fluency and security of their mother tongue or Muttersprache. These considerations prompt me to remind us a little more about the power relations underlying and conditioning all language use, no matter how free expression appears to be. I could talk in Scottish dialect, but I promise you I won't. But I remind you that the difference between a dialect and a language is often described as an army and a navy. The difference between a national language and a world language was thought to be an empire, but might now be said to be an almost irresistible mix of hard and soft power, deploying military, economic, and cultural forces in subordinating and assimilative ways. Here today, we are communicating in an enabling global lingua franca, English, but its usefulness and empowerment are not entirely the result of peaceful sharing and generous education. Thanks to science and technology, I also on this panel have what American revolutionary Thomas Paine called the liberty of appearing, the liberty of appearing, a reminder that so many who seek such freedoms of speech and freedom of presence are forcibly silenced, studiously ignored, or simply made to disappear. So, I greet you while earthbound in my COVID bubble, thankful that my voice can travel, that you can see my face, and that knowledge and ideas can still move around a world where most embodied human subjects cannot. However, that mobility of knowledge and ideas conveyed by language can never fully free themselves from problematic histories and unfortunate opposition. Scientific and academic research are still connectable to error and misapplication. And now too, they have to contend with media-enhanced ignorance mobilization, not knowledge or ignorance mobilization, and cognitive populism, a form of pseudo-thinking, intermittently rational, that claims as its guarantor that it is speaking within, from, and for the people. However, these sobering realities make free speech and the unencumbered dissemination of research more, not less important than ever. They also make scientific and academic work more important than ever. And the incontrovertible authority of academies such as ours, the Austrian and Canadian ones, it makes the authority of academies an anchor, key to the kind of policy formation and implementation that will keep our liberal and social democracies and all their citizens healthy, empowered, and engaged. My position paper, which I circulated earlier, may seem too elitist, but I refuse to allow the idea of elite academic performance to be lost in the paranoid clamor that demonizes all elites as evil and undeserving. We need to liberate the adjective elite from guilt by association with the plural noun elites that is currently the stuff of conspiracy theories, and we need to use it to signify once again admiration for, celebration of individual and institutional research accomplishment. One little word, one big mountain of corrective work and knowledge mobilization. And there are, of course, other little words like freedom, facts, culture, democracy, eagerly awaiting their vaccination against lies and fantasies gone viral, so that we can continue, they can continue these terms inside public discourse of various sorts, narrowly professional, broadly public, continue to do their invaluable work for policy development and social and ecological justice after serious but irreversible damage done by Donald Trump, by Orban, and by too many others. The damage to the language is the damage to the social fabric, is the damage to our capacity to think individually and collectively in the interests of our societies and the planet which we too often take for granted. Hence, the paper I submitted, its insistence on the long history of scientific and academic inquiry, on the very old as well as the very new discouragements and threats to that, and the need for an unapologetic, courageous pursuit and sharing of research, while simultaneously building better relationships with our former students who populate the public service and powerful ministries. And I know that because I worked in one. They populate the public service and powerful ministries, and we need to develop partnerships with citizen scientists and communities under stress. Canada has, as a former white settler colony, Canada also has, Austria has its own distinctive challenges. In Canada, ours is we need to decolonize our settler selves, our settler institutions, which are profoundly and in very good ways Eurocentric, but also have a Eurocentric amnesia about the forms of knowledge that are available in the territories around us among their first inhabitants. So we have to decolonize also. And this work is now at last seriously underway inside the Royal Society, in universities and colleges across the country, as we take the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and put it seriously to work in order to pursue what a number of our institutions call inclusive excellence. The words are good. We wait to see whether we can deliver accurately and adequately on those words. So in my view, we need to value anew, and Simone talks about this in her paper very aptly. How is academic value structured? Is your attempt at vulgarization, at reaching a wider audience, at talking about your project, the things you love to do and why you love to do them, that work is invisible on the average CV. We have structured things in such a way as to incentivize certain parts of what I think are our fuller academic responsibilities. We need to value, promote, and reward people who are very good at making the arguments for the value and urgency of our research. So we need to value anew the work of advocacy for the quality and the importance of scientific research. And this, for me, is a job primarily for people like me. That is, it has to start with those who have security of reputation and employment. They're secure and eminent, but what's reputation for? It can nourish the careerist ego, or it can be deployed in the interests of legitimating particular kinds of research, particular kinds of questioning, particular kinds of distribution of resources to the public's benefit. So it's a job primarily for the secure and eminent, but also for properly funded and effectively mentored precarious and emergent scientists. I see at the moment an immense waste and discouragement and spurning of talent and legitimate aspiration. We really have, certainly in Canada, to take much more care about mentoring, about finding places, security of employment, longevity of career, the kind of path on which young scientists and young scholars of all sorts, when they embark upon a path like that, they are able to produce the work of which they are capable and which they have been trained for. So I see the need for cultural shifts. I see a key doubleness here. The university and academies are the locus of inquiry, the place where inquiry looks out and explains the world. Universities and academies also need to become the focus of inquiry. As well as looking out, we must look in. And when we look in, we need to take our critical intelligence, our capacity for robust analysis, and apply it to how we treat each other, how we resource, how we nourish, how we empower invaluable voices for the conversation of tomorrow. Now, not just anybody can be the next David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, or David Suzuki, but we need a succession plan to populate cooperative rather than competitive lobbies, and lobbies of policymakers that have themselves an explicit, evolved, intergenerational solidarity, in which part of my job is to make sure not to clone myself in the position which I currently occupy, not cloning the professoriate, but renewing it through the embrace of energy and difference and commitment that has its own voice and brings its own concerns to the table. In this plan, I think, to look in as well as out, to change key things about the structuring of reward and incentive within our academy, this plan should depend upon and demonstrate the key link between academic freedom, research interests, research excellence rather, and the public interest. This is for me the very link that joins the Austrian Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society of Canada in such timely and promising ways. The very link that offers, in my opinion, the best basis on which to mediate between the overlapping but sometimes conflicting values and demands of academic communication and research on the one hand, and freedom of speech as a democratic and human right on the other. Much work to get done, and we'll all have to get cracking after today's panel is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very fascinating talk, I have to say. I have many interesting quotes. I like one a lot, damage to language is damage to the social fabric. I think this one, may be also relevant in other statements. As you mentioned Simon's position paper, maybe we just continue with you, Simon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My talk is really a personal reflection on freedom of speech and freedom of research, and I touched upon, maybe from a slightly different perspective than Alice suggested, upon two of the topics that she raised in her initial statement. The question on how to address the public as researchers comes up in my talk, and also the question, who do we talk to, but also from my perspective as a researcher. Now, I introduced myself only briefly because I will speak about my background now. I am an interdisciplinary sustainability researcher. I said that, and this is a field that gained interdisciplinary sustainability. Science gained a lot of attention in the last 2 years with the Fridays for Future movement, when suddenly the climate crisis became an issue of public concern much more than it was before. So no longer was it only a scientific, or not only, but mostly a scientific problem, but really a public problem. And the other angle that I want to bring in here today is that most of my academic career or my academic life, I have been working as a third-party funded or project-funded researcher. So I only really last year took up a tenure track position at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences. So I also reflect on the question, how does this question of precariousness and project funding affect how young or youngish researchers interact with the public, and also how free they are to do the research they want. So, and I will talk about a few structural constraints to freedom of speech and freedom of research from really my very personal perspective. But before I do that, I want to stress that really I think freedom of speech and freedom of research are not at risk in Austria in general. So we are, as researchers, and even myself as a project or previously project funded and not for a long time precarious researcher, we are not at risk if we do the type of research we want, or if we do the type of we speak about that in public, we don't risk safety or integrity. So I want to stress that, and I'm grateful for that. And I think the same is probably, or similar is true in Canada. So, but again, there are some structural constraints, I think, to both freedom of research and freedom of speech. Now, I want to start by speaking about freedom of research, where again, I think in terms of the type of research that can get funded in theory, research is fairly free in Austria. So there is the Austrian National Science Fund. There are also European excellence programs where you can apply with any kind of research, and if it is considered excellent by reviewers, you could get it funded. And so there are no political interventions into those kinds of excellence funding schemes. I think that works, except that there is usually not enough funding, and projects sometimes don't get funded even if they were evaluated excellent. There is, on the other hand, and that is particularly true for sustainability sciences, there are a lot of topical calls for projects. So in the EU Horizon or previously framework programs, there are a lot of calls that invite researchers to submit projects on certain topics, which is good and understandable, and I'm very much in favor of that. It is a political will to foster research into certain directions to contribute to solving pressing sustainability crises. That is good. On the other hand, it has an effect that researchers like myself, if funded by such programs, we develop a scientific profile, we develop competences and careers that are somehow shaped by these calls. Yes, and so not only by our interests, but also by what was possible. And then if we apply for the more freer type of project, we have to work with our competences and also with our profile, because funding is so scarce, and we have higher chances of winning if we build on our competences and can show that this is what we have already developed a profile in. So in a sense, there is a nudging towards certain topics and a discouragement of trying completely new things. Yes, and here, I mean, we talked about this in the preparatory meeting, and some ideas how to overcome this. I'm really very much in favor of topical project calls. One idea to allow for even freer research could be to have more programs like the Austrian National Science Fund's 1000 Ideas program, where with a very low threshold, very bold ideas can get funded in seed money, not super large projects, but just to allow researchers to really explore ideas. That is one suggestion I want to make today. Now I turn to the issue of freedom of speech. Again, I start by saying, yes, freedom of speech is given. We can talk about our work and we don't risk to lose our jobs or to, I don't know, go to jail or anything. And as a sustainability researcher, really, I experienced how the public interest has gained a lot, has grown a lot in the recent years. And the types, I mean, that is a personal thing. I haven't been approached by policy to provide answers, but more, for example, by social movements, yes, to speak at demonstrations or even just media, whatever. So very, very general. We are just, I and my colleagues, we get invited more and more to, or by NGOs, for example, to speak about sustainability challenges and the current crisis. And that is, of course, great because it shows that the research is now in the public interest. But I also experience and see with my colleagues that there are some obstacles, and one Len has touched upon, academic evaluation systems, and in particular for young or precarious researchers more generally, evaluation systems don't incentivize in public engagement very general. So it's now there is a term third mission that should be recognized more and more, and I am part also at my university of a working group that aims towards better monitoring of third mission activities, in particular in the context of sustainability transformations, where we say that is a very important thing to do. So there are steps towards this direction, but I think there is a long way to go. We are evaluated based on scientific publications and grants, also in terms of teaching and supervision. Yes, so including this third mission into academic evaluation, I think, is a very important next step. And here possibly also the academies could contribute. I very much have to say, I smiled and I took notes. I very much liked the statement on intergenerational solidarity that Len made. It is an experience that I have only partly made, I have to say personally. So and when I make it, I'm always very grateful. Yes? So that is a very positive vision, if that could establish more. Another issue, the last point I want to make on how to, on the challenges of speaking in public about the research for more precarious or younger researchers is and in particular in the field of sustainability, because this topic has gained a lot of political traction recently. And I think it is also important that we see that the sustainability challenge is a political challenge and not just something that we just all need to learn and then we do it and it's fine. Yes, so that's good. But also for researchers speaking in public about it, it also means taking sides. It means possibly making enemies. And for younger or precarious researchers who might not continue to stay in academia, might need a different job, for example, as Len said, at the ministry or a company or whatever, it's risky to speak up and take sides about sustainability challenges. And you might get in conflict with the potential future employer or risk the possibility of future jobs. So that is another disincentive for precarious researchers to take sides that I think we need to be aware of. And here, of course, it's also not so easy to solve. One thought I had about this was, and that's not, I mean, one thing is, of course, if there were more money for academia then, or for research, then people would be less precarious. That is one thing, of course, but the other thing, the other possibility, I think, a colleague of mine in France is now applying for positions with the CNRS, that is these are French research positions for very young researchers shortly after their PhD. You can apply, and there are not very many of them each year, but if you win that, you really have freedom to do the type of research you want for the rest of your life, and also to, you have a job security and can speak up. So I'm thinking such a type of new kind of academic position might enrich not only the public debates, because people are free to speak up and from a very young age, but also the scientific innovativeness, because people can really explore for a long time without risking their academic progress. So that has been my statement. I hope I haven't taken too long. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simone. As a young scholar too, I'm really happy that we have this perspective represented and this link of intergenerational solidarity that ties us together. I think it's really important to look at both, like the structural elements of the debate, but also like to take into account the individual pressures and also the individual circumstances of being able to combine freedom of research and freedom of speech. And yeah, I look very much forward to what Christian Stobenbauer will tell us from his perspective and maybe also his experiences. And yeah, I will hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, I will connect to both of my previous colleagues who have been previously speaking in that I would like to first outline how we scientists normally communicate, because I assume that not all of our audience will be scientists, and I think it's very important for you to understand how scientists study and how they publish and communicate their work. First, when we want to do research, we have to submit grants, which we basically have to write out like a scientific communication, which a lot of literature back up. Then we submit these grants. Then we will get peer review, which means that other colleagues give us feedback, usually anonymous feedback, and we then have to improve our research, and then we hope that we get the grant. The success rate in Austria is about 25% to my knowledge at the moment. In US and in Canada, it might be even less. When we publish our research, we undergo also very strict rules, and this means that we publish in scientific journals which fit the topic that we publish. If we publish something general, it's in a general journal. And after submission, it's again anonymous colleagues who are experts in our field who are going to read our work, give us feedback, usually also anonymous feedback, and then in this ping-pong play, we improve our research until it's finally published. So we cannot maintain any uncertain issues. We have to always highlight anything that is not uncertain, and we have to back up all our statements with facts. And of course, if we see which degrees of freedom and which ethical limits for communication we have to follow when communicating with the general public, of course, there's additional issues, and this type of language usually does not work. And so we are very good at communicating in our own scientific community, but this line of communication, which has been part of our education, is not the one that we need to do when we address issues that are timely problems and things like that. So there has been a tradition how we interact, or there has been a development of how we interact with the general public. And I would like to call the style that we developed to interact with policymakers as quotation marks, the assessment style language. And the assessment style language works basically in two dimensions in which we give statements. The first dimension is that we state along an evidence scale concerning scientific backup. And the second dimension is the correspondence scale, so the degree of correspondence with the work of other scientists. And these two dimensions then allow us to give weighted statements in which we basically back up our scientific knowledge, but also at the same time state how certain we can be when we communicate these issues. I have to say that I'm not fully sure if this style of communication is already the general style, but I think it's a very important development how us scientists have learned to deal with the problems, to talk to people who are not experts and have other interests. Then there is a second issue that I would like to raise. It basically concerns two important questions. What happens? How can we defend established scientific-based facts against fake facts spread by pseudoscientific influencers among enthusiast followers or by hostile lobbyists who strategically seed distrust to publish their own agenda? This is a completely new challenge in times of social networking, also for us scientists. And to communicate successfully under hostile or ignorant circumstances is certainly a new challenge for us, which we urgently need to learn how to develop a code of conduct to do this. I have seen a few questions that have been posted that I actually would like to pick up because they actually fit quite well into these two dimensions. The first question I would like to address is by Chris W. And he asked the question, how can we ensure public quotation, parenthesis, government or scientists research can be free from biased political influences? I think some issues have already been raised by Simone and by Len. And I have to say that we are particularly lucky in Austria, and I assume also certainly in Canada, that we kind of are one of the few countries in which freedom of research certainly is quite open to us. And the same, of course, is true to freedom of speech. But of course, freedom comes with responsibilities. And we have to meet these responsibilities by basically following the rules of communications and the rules that we gave ourselves to conduct research. So political bias influences, at least in basic research, are relatively few, aside of the fact that we have to raise money. And I have already highlighted, usually we get reviewed by colleagues and not by politicians, so that basically the decisions are based on scientific grounds, how we get our money. Okay, and the second questions of Chris W. How can we remove undue influence from corporations? And this is actually a very important question that I would rephrase a little bit. What are the degrees of freedom? What the ethical limits for communication with the general public or with other stakeholders? So we kind of should not be naive in that other stakeholders clearly have interests, politicians have interests, and that we in our scientific way of communication basically need to always have the background of there is something behind and there's a lot of strategy in real life outside science. So this is clearly an issue that we have to meet. On the other hand, there is a lot of pseudoscientific issues that are particularly raised in social networks, and there's completely new challenges for scientists who are basically with their means of communication, so we cannot reach these statements adequately. And so I think this is one of the really big problems in our time that we really find to, we need to develop a code of conduct, how we basically phrase our communication in this kinds of problems. And I think this is a good time for me to stop and hand over back to Alice.
Yeah, I think this was a perfect complementation to the other two statements. I saw that you were interestingly listening and nodding. So maybe Simon or Len, you have direct comments to each other. And I would also like to remind the audience that you can paste questions that we will try to address towards the end as well.
If I could, no, up to you.
Okay, just very briefly, I very much enjoyed Christian's input, and I would just like to offer a thought on your comment about the challenge of having scientific facts stand against like active fake facts positioned by deliberate interests. I fully agree. To me, and I have thought of this problem also as a political problem and a problem also that the media need to solve. I mean, this reporting of, in particular, climate change, where for a long time there was this kind of he said, she said journalism that would say, yes, some people argue there is climate change, others argue maybe it doesn't exist. I think that is also a problem that the media need to solve, but of course I'm very much with you that we need to find a language and a way to deal with this challenge. We cannot wait for media to solve it on their own.
Yes, you're talking about the curse of balance, that we have one denier and one proponent. I mean, and that this is the just picture, which is of course totally wrong. I think I'd like to raise a couple of questions. One, and it's part of the broader thinking that we've all been doing as we both anticipate and dread this panel and wonder what we're going to say. And the question is about, is there to use a Habermasian phrase, a legitimation crisis in science? Is there a legitimation crisis? And I will suggest to you that from my experience in Canada, there is not. One of the astonishing effects of the pandemic is that Canadians have been exposed every single day to a huge roster of medical scientists analyzing the shifting picture and the competing possibilities of the pandemic. And what has been astonishing to me, I mean, Canada is an officially multicultural country, which in its migration experience has handled perhaps better than many countries, including some European countries. But on display, we had the nation's brains. The gender balance was astonishing. The intergenerational solidarity, I'm glad you liked that expression, was also much in evidence. That is, that no one sees the whole picture, and some very important parts of the picture are only available to those who are emerging from doctoral and postdoctoral work with a hand on the very current dimensions of what's going on. And they were Canadians of all ethnicities. With all sorts of immigrant intonations and accents. That is, what was on display was a kind of impromptu, multicultural academy of expertise that was different from what the political spin, vaccine nationalism, competing commercial interests and all of that. But it was a series not of unanimous voices, but interestingly diversified voices. So I thought to myself that really this is an extraordinarily powerful legitimation of the scientific project, in its diversity, in its care, in its appropriate caution, and also on the fact that there are ongoing disagreements. We could do this, and we could also do that. So what it does is take the simple-minded clamor and put it back in the complexities that are our bread and butter, returns it to complexity, redelivers nuance. So in Canada, I would argue there has been a wonderful theatrical, serial performance of scientific competence, which reminds us how lucky we are and how we would have been if we didn't have those scientists speaking to the challenges of COVID. So I don't see a legitimation crisis in Canadian science. I hasten to add that I live in the United States.
Maybe one question that I had was related to the facts versus value issue. So is it so easy to distinguish between facts and values?
Well, I think that one of the answers is there are disciplinary conventions, and they vary from discipline to discipline. But rather than get too defensive, I want the Academy to recover its swagger. I want it to be out there, confident in the clarity and cogency of its own voice. We have nothing to apologize for. We have much to bemoan in terms of underfunding, insecurities of various sorts that diminish the capacity of the scientific community and the academy more generally to enter things. But I always suggest that my first point of call will not be to start beating myself up about what did Habermas say about facts and values? What did X say and what did Y say about them? What are the opposition saying? And lo and behold, for someone who enjoys a good scrap like me, I get a gift such as alternative facts. Now, I've read my Wittgenstein as carefully as I could. I've read the linguistic philosophers. Alternative facts is a new dimension to me. So that one of the ways in which we face the discursive and representational challenge of populist accusation is to examine that language, to put it under the microscope, to say, where is your authority? To take that assessment style and lay it over this stuff and show its dangers and that it is being manipulated in particular kinds of ways. So sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes it's impossible to separate fact from value. And when they're mutually embedded, I think one has to respect the structure rather than deny the structure and think that the research outcome will always be atomic rather than cohesive. That is to say, much of what we do is by separating things off, suspending some questions in order to pursue others. But I think we also need to put those things back together again. You may do gallbladders, but you're also a doctor, right? So that we need, and this is part of what's happening in Canada, is the reaffirmation of holistic thinking, going along with the interrogation of the anthropogenic and the Anthropocene, and suggesting that the planet, despite Mercator, there are no lines that distinguish the national boundaries. The planet is one in a sort of gaia thinking, thinking about the whole as a harmonious and sometimes dissident convergence of different geological geomorphic systems. We need to think about that. And so rather than suggesting, because facts versus values, your question, Elise, could lead to angels dancing on pinheads, to philosophical minutiae that resonate within our communities, but have no resonance or clarity or impact outside them. So I think one of the things to do is to, like listening to a colleague, listening to our students, listening to our families and communities, a question seems unfair in some ways or imprecise in ways that could be damaging. Go after the question first before you seek your own answer.
Christian, you wanted to say something?
Yes, actually, I could elaborate a little bit more on this and maybe make it a little bit more focused towards the new problem. And I think one of the really challenges, the real challenges we face is that we need to recognize and to deal with fake facts. And there is a few new developments that I observed recently, for example, in the Austrian Broadcasting Company. In that, aside of bringing news, there is an interview with a scientist, which basically acts as a fact checker and gives a founded background for particular issues. And I think this is a very important function that needs to be more and more fulfilled in our society. And I think we could actually extend these questions by asking if a new institution is needed for providing independent fact checks for the general public, fact checks for the general public. And the question, of course, arises, would the Austrian Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society in Canada be such institutions which would have the standing and also the broadness of expertise in order to make this kind of statements and checks? And I would also remind the audience that this actually has been happening in Germany just recently with the COVID problematics. There was official statements of the Leopoldina or scientists of the Leopoldina who made their statements to particular problems. And this, for example, has not been the case in Austria. There have always been individual scientists that have been recruited by governmental institutions.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add one thought on that, I think that's a very good observation and suggestion, Christian, this fact-checking mission of researchers and the potential role of academies. Coming back to Alice's question, how to differentiate values versus facts, I observe the problem somehow the other way around, where the facts that I see in my research and that are also well known in research on resource use and on climate change, they become political. So what is sort of factual in my work is really induces a kind of a radical political or has radical political implications when you think about what would it really mean to decarbonize as quickly as we would need to achieve the Paris agreements, for example. I mean, these are really very radical shifts in the fundamentals of our societies that would actually be required. And this is really a learning process that I'm facing, how to communicate the importance and severity of the the challenges that are ahead in a way that is compatible with what media are used to telling. And just one very small anecdote from Austria that the Austrians here probably remember in a different context. I thought a few weeks ago when a medical researcher in Innsbruck pointed towards the challenge of the new corona strand in Zillertal in the Tyrolean province, and she said, actually, we need to do something right now. And this was a scientific evidence that she brought to the public, and there was suddenly and very quickly a lot of political opposition to this, but she really worked from her facts, I guess. So really my observation is quite the opposite, that we have somehow facts and they don't align with the reality of the discourse that is had in the media and politics.
I would suggest that there are wonderful examples among your scientific predecessors of how this predicament in which you arrive at facts and you have a double vision, you see how it shifts the scientific understanding, and you hear the earthquake in society when the fact moves beyond your particular investigation out into society. Charles Darwin, when he was writing on the origin of species, rapidly realized that what he was moving towards was a series of facts and an evolutionary model that was like the Lisbon earthquake, or the Krakatoa eruption of 1882. It was huge. It was going to alter the social and ethical and theological landscape forever. And so he gets through to the end of this, his laying out of the facts. And what does he say at the end of the origin of species? And the last paragraph, rather than a mea culpa, rather than I don't care, is a description of a tangled bank of vegetation on the river bank, a riparian complexity in front of him. That is, he returns to the scene of the scientific gaze and the magic and wonder of scientific work. That is, he goes back into his activity rather than out to be insulted and stoned by society. He goes back into the calling, the vocation of science. There are many moments like that in scientific literature. And one of the reasons to always, not to forget science's history, but to make it, to animate it, to make it live again in new and empowering ways, is to go to these scenes of the acute predicament where the nature of your work inescapably is going to have serious social ramifications and maybe controversial outcomes. And he did quite well, Darwin.
Maybe I can continue. Actually, I would like to pick a question to follow up a few other issues. There is one question of Andre Gingrich. I would like to read it to the audience because I assume that you are not seeing these questions. These researchers don't even agree among themselves. Is what often hears from what one often hears from politicians these days when they are asking why researchers do not have more to say in pandemic policy decisions. Academia always is facing the double challenge of protecting internal academic pluralism while simultaneously communicating established academic insights and assessments to the outside and the public. That challenge has become even more intense during this pandemic crisis. From your own experience, do you have good suggestions how to solve this in better ways today? I think this is a very important question that has been raised by Mr. Gingrich, and actually I should say that we do have a responsibility, but also we do have rules how we as a scientist should communicate our insights. And I think we should clearly distinguish that scientists are here to bring balanced views of the state of the art in particular fields and answers which might be partial answers to particular questions. We are not the ones who are going to take the decisions, and this is the job of the politicians. So when we make statements, basically we should be very careful of how we make the statements so that we do not prejudice any decisions to be taken. I think this is a very important issue that we always have to keep in our mind concerning our responsibility. So a good suggestion how to solve this, I think, was this kind of assessment style language, which I already posed as one of the possibilities. And that's actually one way in practice how we scientists can phrase all these issues with the given degrees of uncertainties.
Len and Simon, do you have any thoughts on this question? Because if not, we have some other questions in the chat that I could read. Yeah. So there is one comment and question by Verena Vinivata from the Austrian Academy of Sciences. I will read it. So the ability of fighting for truth in what I perceive as a very real legitimization crisis in Europe, in particular under right-wing governments, is made more difficult by what Simone Gingrich has talked about. Because she talked about the structural limits to freedom of research, in particular for precarious employed researchers. To my opinion, freedom is at risk if grant money from large grants controlled by very few governments, controlled funding agencies becomes the dominant source of funding because the funders shape what is possible, claiming that they're objective, of course. So Verena Vinivata's question is, if the panelists can think of other structural measures to counteract the structural challenges, other than what Simone mentioned, so the third mission inclusion into evaluations or the CNRS grants, which are extremely competitive and therefore not a solution. So what could we ask for? Which concrete measures would other panelists envisage to somehow capture these structural measures to counteract the structural challenges? Simone.
Yes, just, I mean, of course, in my statements, I made those that were most obvious to me, but now during the discussion, I will repeat again, of course, the quota, the share of GDP put into science and research and also universities in general, that should be higher. That is my important statement. Another idea that I learned about that I don't know if it has ever been tried out, but I know it's been being discussed because the processes of peer review that also Christian talked about are so at their limit. There are ideas of, you know, lotteries for project grants. Of course, this will not solve, but I think we need a pluralism of solutions because the funding will not immediately grow. But so kind of submission and then really by luck, you save a lot of time for the reviewer. and after a certain quality check, just try to provide project funding based on luck. I think we need to be much more innovative in terms of how funding is given. And I agree with Verena, there is a sort of a clustering of power who decides on those grants.
It seems to me that sometimes it's more than a nudge. You know, you use nudge. Sometimes it is very dirigiste. It is directing people in particular kinds of ways. So the idea that science is providing alibis for the extractive industries or whatever is terrible. What we need here is effective leadership at the top of the institutions That is the job of our senior administration, including those who are the stewards of the research enterprise. They have to work with colleagues to develop the language that separates the autonomy and integrity of the investigator from the ill-concealed desires of the funder or tacit expectations. You need, across Canada, there is now, as a response to these very genuine and in fact worsening difficulties of funding, skewing, and capturing scientific curiosity, becoming subservient to agendas from the outside. And one of the things that's happened is that there's a whole range of policies that protect graduate students around the right to publish and so on. So there's a new regime that is supposed to be protective of the independence and integrity of scientists. The real problem is in the application of this. That is, in making it work to protect the young scientist whose funder says, well, you're publishing too late, or you're publishing too early, you're endangering my commercial interests by publishing this kind of way. So what one needs is not only the language, but it needs that part of the academic scientist work is to produce and monitor the regulations that protect them from inappropriate contamination or compromise of the scientific work. So you need to know how the university works, and you need to know how you can make it work in the interests of inquiry rather than in the interests of those who fund inquiry. So that donations should come unconditionally, rather than, I mean, if you're an authoritarian philanthropist, that's a contradiction in terms. You want to give your money, but you want to also determine what the outcome of that will be. What you want is unconditional generosity. Neither the external donors and notoriously, neither of governments are particularly prone to that. When I worked as a policy analyst on universities, I was told by the Treasury Board usually and by politicians, you're all the same in universities. Leave a bag of money on a tree stump and trust us, is your view of the outside. And I said, well, that's not a bad idea, actually, as long as it's a big bag of money. And trust is crucial here. And the predicament of trust, the undermining of trust, is part of the larger problem that Elise had identified for us in her framing of this. In Canada, every year, the Canadian Association of University Teachers commissions a survey which involves where do academics fit on the trust calculus or index year to year. And interestingly enough, despite what some people say, academics come out way up there, well beyond politicians. Maybe there's some envy here. But the point, and on the other point of it, so people do trust us, and they are regular beneficiaries of the trust, non-critical, but trust that they put in science. And I think that we need to bear that in mind.
Christian? You need to unmute your microphone.
I'm very sorry. There is another question that I would like to read. and maybe try to answer from Frederick Steur, I would also disagree that there is a general decrease in trust in science. We should refrain to deduce such a statement from the certainly undeniable increase of science hostile views in social media. Those who are loudest do not automatically represent the majority. I think, simply speaking, scientists also have the responsibility and obligation to continuously justify their methodologies and findings in front of non-scientists. Scientists are, after all, privileged to typically possess the better arguments and knowledge base. Hence, there should be nothing to fear in conquering general ignorance and persuading disbelievers. Public engagement and third mission activities in general need to drastically increase among scientists, even if it would result in a general decrease of scientific activities. Freedom of science and justification of science do not compete but complement each other. Scientific institutions and funding agencies need to guarantee necessary support, and publication mania needs to stop. Actually, it's a long statement. There would be a lot of points which we could address here. I think I would like to pick one particular issue, and this is that there is those who are the loudest do not automatically represent the majority, but it's very clear that there is a science hostile there's science hostile developments and statements increasing in social media, and I think we scientists should not be naive. And you know, if there is new means of communication around the lines of ethics, I think we should remind public that there is ethical rules how to communicate, and what Verena called the truth is something we never can know for absolute, but of course it's something that we can support with a lot of evidence. And I would really say that we scientists should be realistic to some extent and actually actively use the new terms and develop rules how to counteract these activities. And I really think it's very important that we learn to do this.
Thank you very much, Christian. Nathalie Desrosiers just joined us. You have to unmute your mic.
Yes, my apologies. I was at the vaccination clinic, so it took longer. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe would you like to say a few words about freedom of speech, freedom of research? We are in the middle of the debate and already answering questions, but it would be nice to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So again, my apologies. So I think my note and my reflections are about the fact that the essence of freedom of research and freedom of academic freedom is the autonomy of institutions. So the autonomy of the academies and the autonomy of university, which translate now in terms of issues about responsibility and accountability. So part of if I may say two points here. The first point is, I think for a long time we may have put in opposition equality versus liberty, and that has created a claim that liberty has been achieved at the expense of equality. That's incorrect. We obviously need both. You know, when we say liberté, égalité, fraternité, it's not a multiple choice answer. We need all three of them, and we certainly need both liberty and equality. I mean, if you only have liberty without equality, obviously it leads to the elite having all the liberty and the capacity to exploit. So that's unacceptable morally and legally. And secondly, if you have equality without liberty, you risk freezing debates and preventing future debates or future challenges, because part of the essence of academia is to often find the words to denounce new forms of injustices. And I think that's something that we don't want to lose in that debate. So a few thoughts that I put in terms of the world in which we hear. So I entitled this "More Speech, Not Less, More Science, Not Less." So the point of these remarks is simply to say it is absolutely crucial that universities, academics as individuals, but collectively as academies, take their responsibility very seriously. Number one, to denounce and be present to falsehoods, you know, to respond in a way that accurately states the facts. We're often not that well equipped to do that. We don't have an army of fact checkers that are on Twitter and on Facebook and so on to respond immediately to correct the facts. We tend to be individuals that kind of work on their own and their own work, so that capacity to be out there and responding quickly, it may lack. So I think academies may reflect on this, how in the long run this may be something that a function that needs to be developed a little bit more. I actually find that blaming the public for the existence of climate change deniers, anti-maskers, anti-vaccination proponents is just not very useful. And I think most of these reactions are rooted in fears so how we better respond to these fears in a context of understanding that fear is part of what we must study. I think so in itself, I think the way in which people respond to bad news or scary news is itself an object of study, an object of research that we must undertake. And finally, I think we should create a deeper sense of our ethical duties as a collectivity. So because we have seen that some scientists have created almost a business model for themselves as becoming personality cults or media personalities by publicizing wrong facts, spreading bad research. I mean, we've seen that. So I think we have a responsibility, if I go back to the essential, which is autonomy means responsibility. So as academies, I think we must develop a stronger code of conduct and not be afraid of challenging people that are not respecting these codes. So we may have to develop almost a professionalization and a way in which, like I'm a lawyer by training, and other professions develop codes of conduct and ability to discipline their members that do not follow their code of ethics. So I think the reflections, I really enjoyed actually the reflections of that was set up to say that in a way we must reflect our own processes as part of freedom. Freedom means responsibility, and we must continue to do that as we do today in an accessible and transparent way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this was a very nice statement. There were many elements that we already talked about, but this ethical dimension I think is really important, and also the autonomy of institutions, equality and liberty. I think we have not yet nailed that down in these terms, so that was really useful. What I would propose is that maybe we have like a final round of short statements, because we are already at the end, but they told me we can have a few minutes more if we want. So yeah, I don't know who wants to start.
Hello, Natalie. Good to see you. This is Len.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I'm so happy to see you.
We have been on joint projects in the past, and I would just like to say that this conversation, this initiative, this idea of joint, Natalie's paper points to the urgency of collaboration rather than competition as one of the ways of pushing in the right direction, the right ethical direction, the right forms of accountability to the right people. rather than being beholden to those who have already plenty of power and even more money. So that in a sense, I see that new forms of collaboration that are cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional, cross-academies, that we try to leverage the individual forms of authority and reputation in particular societies, the notion of the National Academy. And if you put those two words together, of course, they change each other and they start fighting with one another. And that's very good. That's very good. I should have said pan-Canadian rather than national, for example, in terms of our Canadian conversations. But I think this should continue. I think that one of the things I found most interesting was how it kept me awake at night, thinking about this panel and wondering about what everyone would say. And I think that one of the great outcomes is a minor mountain of unfinished business that we need to pursue further. And so I will think a bit more about how we could develop some of these into around particular initiatives, the 1000 ideas program. We need to get more information shared so we can share best practices and perform the forms of productive collaborative collegiality, I think, that we really need in order to face down the challenges before us.
Well, let me quickly take over as time is already short. I also enjoyed Natalie's statement very much because it was very complementary to what we have said before. And you also raised an important issue that we should never forget, the fear that arises from the problems that we are facing. And this is certainly something that adds a dimension to it. And the other issues, the mountain of unfinished business that was mentioned by Len is certainly something that we should take up. And I think we should continue to take this problem absolutely serious as scientists and also as members of society in the academic environment.
Yes, if I may, I would follow up. Also, I enjoyed very much the discussion tonight and the preparation and the thinking about what we would be talking about. So I'm very grateful for this. I agree with I heard minor mountain of unfinished business, so it's a bit less concerning. And one issue that I particularly think about now is the question of fact-checking and how that could be pursued or how academies could contribute to that. That was an idea that Christian brought up. So thank you for this inspiring debate and also for the audience who contributed important questions.
If I may conclude, I think one other idea that I had as we prepared was this idea of academies speaking to each other, as Len says, more cooperation. We could, in the academic world, we often want to have evaluations from other university coming to evaluate a program, coming to evaluate the way in which we do business. We may want to imagine similar cooperations between academies. You know, could we have the Austrian Academy coming to help us look a bit critically at the way in which the Canadian, the Royal Society is operating in Canada. So, you know, sharing best practices, but also it may also enhance our capacity to have credibility if we have the ability to say, well, we've just had an outsider examine and help us define our best practices.
Yeah, thank you very much for these concluding thoughts. I think the cooperation between the two academies is a fantastic idea, and I very much enjoyed the debate, and I think there is a lot of food for thought for the audience, but also for the panelists. And yeah, I would like to wish you a nice evening. And also, I would like to thank Ms. Weilinger and Mr. Bernhard Lindner for their technical support. So thank you very much. I think we didn't have any problems at all. And also to the audience for their questions. We have a thank you in the chat from Verena Winivata as well. And I hope that many will watch this session because it will be available. So there will be a link to the video. And yeah, thank you very much and have a nice day and nice evening.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you very much.